It's the Ed Bernstein Show, Home Edition. Now, here's your host, Ed Bernstein.
Hi, welcome to our show. Our topics today, really interesting. Addiction, marijuana. Hey, what could be a better topic to talk about? A little bit later in the show, Riana Durrett, who is now a new, well, we have a whole new Marijuana Compliance Board, and she's one of the governor's appointees. She's a former head of the Nevada Dispensary Association. She'll be here. But now it's my pleasure. Dave Marlon is the CEO of Crossroads, which is a recovery facility as well as a rehab facility, and Vegas Stronger, which I'm not really familiar with. Vegas Stronger. You want to talk about that first? What do you do over there?
Sounds good. Vegas Stronger is a nonprofit 501c3 outpatient drug treatment center on North Main Street. So the idea of Vegas Stronger is to try to pull the community together to help our most underserved. And what I've noticed, being a longtime Las Vegan and visiting the shelters frequently, I noticed that many people in the shelters aren't getting well. What they're doing is they're getting 3 square meals and they're getting a place to stay, but they're staying in their same cycle, and often a cycle of addiction. Homelessness is both caused by addiction, and it's also a coping mechanism as a result of homelessness. So Vegas Stronger brings outpatient drug treatment services to the clients who are in the mission in the various shelters. We have 2,000 shelter beds in town.
Oh, wow, that's true. More than I thought, but I'm sure not nearly as many as we need. But I do want to get back to the homelessness problem, but I wanted to ask you first, personally, how you got involved in all this.
Thanks for asking. I worked at Health Plan in Nevada for 20 years. I had progressive jobs up till I was the president of one of their HMOs and president and CEO of one of their insurance companies. I loved working there. I really grew up there. During that time, I saw that Nevada offered the whole cadre of medical services. Although when we had somebody who needed substance abuse, we were sending them to Arizona, to California, to Utah. I was surprised that we didn't have a good residential treatment center in Las Vegas. A little over 15 years ago, I went to a place myself in California. And while I was there, I thought to myself, wow, I could run one of these places way better than these people are. So when I came out of treatment, I ended up filing for a license, and I opened up a rehab called Solutions Recovery. It grew over 13 years to be a 400-bed drug and alcohol treatment center here in Las Vegas. I then packaged it and sold it to a New York Stock Exchange publicly traded company and sort of retired. A few years into retirement, my friends over at Crossroads asked me if I would come and help them because they were struggling to keep their indigent detox center open. So I took the job, and I'm working as a CEO over at Crossroads now, and I love it.
You know, when you're talking about your own personal experience, you hear oftentimes that people go in and out of rehab multiple times. Why does that happen? And why did it happen to you?
I'm lucky. I went to rehab one time, and I had reached the point where I was sick and tired of being sick and tired of waking up not feeling right without breaking my word, saying I wouldn't do this again. So I was done. So on 5/15/05, I took my last drink in McCarran Airport and got on a plane, and thank God I haven't drank since. Now, when I heard you had skin cancer earlier this year, and sometimes people who get cancer have to go back for chemotherapy or go back to treatment multiple times. Would people ask you, why do you go back for oncology treatment multiple times? And the answer is because the disease came back. And addiction really needs to be looked at as a disease the same way. And many people come to treatment and get well. Also, many people relapse after an admission, and the answer is to have them get back into treatment, usually for a longer duration. Because unfortunately, to begin thinking differently, it takes time. the physiological separation from drugs or alcohol, we could do that in a week or two. But the psychological, the behavioral separation, that takes a significantly longer time, at least 90 days.
Earlier, when we were talking about the homelessness, I remember, God, it must have been, and I've talked about this before, 20, 30 years ago in Las Vegas. We had a budget issue, and the governor and this budget and everything changed, and we cut back on the meds that we were giving to a lot of the homeless that were outpatient. And as a result of that budget issue at that time, all of a sudden, you drive around town, you see, 3-4 times the number of homeless that you used to see. You made a statement that got me thinking, hey, that drugs are how did you phrase it? It's the cause of homelessness and also
Lots of homelessness, yes.
Right. I mean, so I don't know what the status is now. I don't know whether, they can get their antidepressant medicine today and still, because they were able to get the meds then and function somewhat better than they can today. Is that not working well? It is working well? What do you think?
I'd say dismal failure is the current state. And really, if you go back in history, 60 years ago, we used to institutionalize people. And this was federal money to have institutions to hold people with mental illness or chronic inebriants. Then what we did is we moved it to an outpatient model. And then we had outpatient centers all over for several decades. Then as budget crisis came through, one of the first things we started cutting were these outpatient mental health services. And now we're surprised that we have many people with mental illness not being treated and a burgeoning homeless population.
I know you do so much work in there, and you're down in the tunnels, under the freeways, and you're doing your best to combat a lot of these issues. And we could probably talk about this for a long time, but I do want to talk about COVID-19, what it's doing to mental health, what it's doing, what the resulting potential addiction is as a result of that. Is it better that people are not in bars, by the way, or doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter. As you know, people in maximum security prisons still get alcohol and drugs. So limiting access to it, by closing down bars does not stop people with a disease that I have from going to get what we need.
And of course, the atmosphere is so difficult to function, and people are out of work. They can't pay the rent. They may not have a place to live. They can't see their loved ones. I mean, you put all these factors together. I mean, it's a fireball we're creating.
It is a recipe for disaster. We have the late stage of substance use disorders usually includes isolation, and we now have a government mandated isolation. In addition, many people aren't working, so they have personal anxiety about their own living situation. Plus, if you watch TV or social media or the news, there's lots of things to be anxious about. So, the overall anxiety level of society, the isolation level have all increased. And this is while alcohol use numbers are dramatically up. Marijuana is now plentiful. And as you know, we're still in the midst of an opiate epidemic. I saw after the presidential debates, they listed a drugfacts.org. They had some stats, and opiate prescriptions per American or per 100 is down from 85 to 50, which is wonderful. I appreciate that they're down, but we still are prescribing 50 prescriptions of opiates for every 100 humans in America. The amount of opiates in our society is astounding.
Look, I mean, drugs can be very helpful. It's the old analogy. It's like a scalpel. It can save somebody's life in a surgery, or it can kill somebody, right? How do you balance that?
Well, I got the honor of debating Sir Richard Branson a few years ago. He wanted to talk about marijuana as it was coming to town, and I was grateful to be his guest. And I represented the kind of the abstinent side. And what I said was first, I introduced myself. I said, my name's Dave. I'm an alcoholic. When I said that, about 100 people in the crowd of about 1,500 all said, hi, Dave. And I recognized that, my people were there, and he noticed it as well. And then I said, 92% of America could probably drink or probably use marijuana. About 8 or 9% of us, we have a proclivity to compulsivity, and we can't. So pardon me, but it's not okay for me. And that's one issue to consider, is that, a percentage of Americans have this compulsive use disorder, and whatever's available, if it's alcohol, if it's opiates, if it's marijuana, we're going to get into trouble with it until we get recovery.
You run into situations. I had a child that was chronically ill and was hospitalized a lot of years and spent maybe half a year at a time in the hospital. While she was in the hospital, she was on IV opiates, Dilaudid, and with doses that you can't, she was in this horrific pain, had no colon, had no intestine. She was in horrific pain. But when she would go in the hospital, she would get addicted to Dilaudid. It's a very, very strong medication. And then she'd have to taper off the Dilaudid, come home, and she'd be fine off the drug. It was like a yo-yo thing. Then at some point in time, when marijuana became legal, she realized that she could reduce her dependency on the Dilaudid, use marijuana, and then be able to function and deal with the pain much better for her. But the point I'm trying to make is that she could not control her pain. The surgeons, the doctors, they're the ones in charge of her pain, and they couldn't really give her enough pain medicine the pain go away. What happens in those kind of situations, and what happens when somebody gets out of the hospital?
Unfortunately, that's why we have an addiction epidemic, because we have a light hand with dispensing opiates, and we have for decades. So we still have too many people who are addicted to opiates. I have too many friends who have lost children, who've lost spouses to opiate addiction. So, it's still, I believe, the #1 health problem in our country, despite the fact that all the focus is on the several 100,000 COVID deaths. We've had many more deaths from overdose. And it seems it's a less popular thing to be concerned about.
We just had an election. Several more states legalized marijuana, some of them going from medical, recreational, some of them also, and there's some bills that people are trying to get passed federally to decriminalize marijuana. The House passed a bill decriminalizing it. Our prisons are full of people with drug-related offenses. What's your position on all this?
Variety of positions. First of all, I agree. Incarcerating people who are using marijuana is not a reasonable approach. These people, if they have the disease I have, the answer is to have them get treatment. Incarcerating them does not make sense. And the fact that there's ethnic differences in who we arrest exacerbates the problem even worse, and it needs to be fixed. So arresting people isn't right. At the same time, we have an education challenge right now. And I did see, I went with Riana to Colorado many years ago when we were exploring bringing it to Nevada. I went on a trip to learn. And since then, we've learned that adolescent use is much higher now than it was. But before legalization. So there's issues we still need to work out. And I just believe that things like balancing the budget, things like fixing our education system are way more important than, promoting marijuana. So making a criminal doesn't make sense. But to me, right now, promoting it doesn't make sense either.
Yeah. And you must have the answer to this. What's more expensive, the incarceration or the treatment?
The treatment actually costs less to do, and the results are dramatically better. So, I mean, it's really, from a business person. I have an MBA, ran a insurance company. From a business perspective, this is a no-brainer to provide treatment for these folks as opposed to incarcerating them.
Look, we can go on and talk. This is a great topic, and we're just about out of time. But I have just one more bit of advice from you. As a parent, if you feel your child is, starting to use or starting to have an addiction issue, and you keep talking about getting treatment, where do you get treatment? What type of treatment? How does it start?
It starts by finding a licensed alcohol and drug counselor and getting an assessment. And there's dozens of them in town. You can find them on the internet. Crossroads and Vegas Stronger are both outpatient treatment centers that do assessments. And make an appointment, go in and get an hour-long assessment to find out if you have a substance use disorder. The problem is, for the kids, for the adults, we have denial built in. So as we start to develop a substance use disorder, we refuse to see it. So seeing a professional to help us see that is the right first step.
Thank you, David Marlon. And we'll be right back with Riana Durrett from the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Board. My daughter Dana fought a long battle with Crohn's disease before passing last year. Max has spent a lifetime scoring goals.
It's our goal to help the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation find a cure for this horrible disease, so no one else's child has to suffer like Dana did.
Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis may be unfamiliar to you, but there are currently over 3 million Americans suffering from both. Join Max and I in scoring our goal to find a cure. Welcome back. With me now is Riana Durrett from the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Board. And look, if there's anybody in our state that has, the experience in marijuana, it's Riana Durrett. Formerly, you're an attorney. You were the executive director of the Nevada Dispensary Association. You have been involved in marijuana infancy in this state. Come a long way. A lot of it is a tribute to your hard work. So we appreciate that. Now you're charged with keeping the industry safe, I assume.
Yeah, as an attorney, this is not where I expected my career to go when I first graduated law school, but I was really fortunate that some of the founders of the Nevada Dispensary Association hired me early on, and I got to be a part of something that I was doing criminal and immigration law, and that was so deeply personal to me. But when I started working on this, and I saw how much it meant to those original business owners getting this going, and how many of them it affected their lives, I became really interested in it.
And when you look around, I know you're very well versed in what's going on in a lot of states around the country. When you look at what we're doing in Nevada, I always felt like we were at the forefront of marijuana regulation and reasonable regulation. Are we still there?
Yes, we are. We have struck a great balance between strict regulation. Some of our inspiration has been strictly regulated industries that already exist in Nevada. We've struck a balance between that strict regulation, but allowing the businesses to grow and do what they need to be successful. Some states, several states, many states look at our regulations as a model for their own state. And we struck a really good balance.
Look, I recall some of the problems that we have dealt with. One being when it became legally available, the dispensary owners and the licensees were complaining that there was still a big illegal market, and it was actually sometimes cheaper than buying it and paying tax on it. How's that part of it going?
The illegal market is still a significant problem. In Nevada, we've had a better approach at it, I'd say, by very much having a thorough and strict vetting process at the beginning for the licensees. We had licensees that were doctors and lawyers and bankers. They were happy to follow the rules. That's different than how some states started out, which were people who were used to dealing with the illegal market. They don't always follow the rules, of course. So having vetted licensees, strict rules from the beginning, and not having too many licenses helped us have a good market without too much crossover to the illegal market. It is still a big problem, and there are things that can still be done to address it.
Yeah. Now, of course, at one point, like 5 years ago, when this kind of started, and we got our first dispensaries, it seemed like we were much consumed with showing that marijuana was a safe drug, that it had great medicinal benefits, and there was a lot of positives. I think the people finally got that. Now it seems to me that the challenges are more banking and legal and federal. I mean, so it's still illegal in the federal government in the United States. And you can't get tax deductions, blah blah blah. You can't bank. Can you go explain some of that and where you see this going?
Yeah, like you said at the beginning, it was a struggle to know if these businesses were even going to get open and survive. Now they're doing really well. They've been really embraced in our state. Most of the problems are federal and getting to that last step of being completely like any other business. So banking is still a big impediment, but there's also an IRS code that prevents the businesses from taking standard business deductions. Anybody who's run a business knows that it's very important to be able to take those deductions to be able to afford to run the business. And since cannabis companies can't take that, again, standard business deductions, it's difficult to be able to afford to operate them, to be able to afford the overhead. And so once there's progress at the federal level, these businesses can be treated like any other business. Right.
Yeah, maybe they can pay their employees more if they, got to write off some of those tax deductions. But when you talk about no banking, brings up a host of problems. It means not only can consumers not use credit cards, but it also means that the businesses can't use banks, which means there's an awful lot of cash moving around, which creates unsafe conditions for anybody in the industry. Metro has never been happy about it. It's kind of ironic that you have the police, basically most of the police departments, in favor of allowing banking for this. Right? These are strong bedfellows.
Yeah, I actually had somebody really high up in one of the police departments joke that even the drug cartels are banking because they're doing it illegally and money laundering. Yeah. There's a spectrum because there are plenty of cannabis companies out there that are openly banking with a bank that is, everything is above board. They know who they're banking with, but it is a very important piece of the puzzle, but really can't be fixed at the state level.
Let's talk about the safety and what the state does to ensure that the products are safe.
Nevada has extensive regulations on the security of the products, protecting public health, protecting children, also physical security. To prevent robbery, there are, for example, every facility has extensive cameras, security plans. There's a myriad of things that they go through to make sure that everything is secure. And when I was working in the industry, we would invite law enforcement to take tours, and they were generally very, very impressed with the extent that these facilities go through to keep everybody safe.
Oh, we have a legislative session coming up, right? I'm sure there's going to, and it seems like the legislature kind of fine tunes this a little bit every year. I mean, you learn, it's a new industry, like gaming was at one time in Nevada. And at that time, by the way, it wasn't federally legal either. So they had similar challenges, right?
Right. Yeah. there have been some bill draft requests submitted. None of the bills have come out, have been published with their actual language yet. I think one of the hot topics will be consumption lounges. And
Can you explain what that is?
So a public venue where people can come and consume cannabis, which is, we think of Amsterdam, cafes in Amsterdam. San Francisco has legal consumption lounges. They are connected to the dispensaries themselves, at least initially. So people can come and consume in public, just like a bar, basically. So as far as whether that will pass, there's a spectrum of people in support and people against. One of the largest that will need to be addressed is social equity and making sure businesses there's opportunities for minority-owned businesses, and so I think that's something that'll be tackled this session.
So, are you able to drive through and pick up at a dispensary now?
Yes, there have been drive-thrus approved, and I know for us who have been in this industry since the day it started, easy to imagine that, but it's also crazy that we didn't just do them from the beginning. Why was it so hard for people to grasp that this would be okay? Now we understand that it's really not a big danger.
Actually, safer in a lot of ways, I would think, particularly with COVID. And you made a statement earlier about the industry Nevada is doing very well. Is that because or in spite of COVID?
I think it's in spite of COVID. My guess, I don't think an economist has actually looked at this, but I think our industry was poised very well. We've have great building blocks. Now more people understand that it's legal. Hopefully more people are coming off of the illegal market. There's a certain amount of people in every population that are going to consume no matter what. And so it's a matter of just getting them to consume to purchase on the legal market instead of the illegal market. So I hope that's what's happening more and more. And the industry is, it's really fortunate that it's doing well now, because because we need the money in the state.
The safer you can keep it, and when you get some of these tax provisions to keep the costs down, then people will use it the right way. That's what we're all hoping for, right?
I heard one example recently of some of our testing regulations, which are really thorough and strict, very, very much so. They're probably some of the best in the country. A reg telling me other states just don't do certain types of testing at all that we do. They just don't address it.
Right. So
it's another component we can be proud of.
Hey, this is Nevada. We do everything first class, right? Thank you so much, Riana Durrett from the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Board, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
And we'll see you next week.
If you've been injured, turn to someone you can trust. Enough said. Call Ed.
Over the last 43 years, we've helped thousands of Nevadans hurt at work. We can help you.